I'm joined by Steven Poacher to talk all things football. Stephen, we'll jump straight into it. Last weekend, having looked at all the different games, I mean, there were so many matches on, but if we talk about Cork beating Kerry just at the death, Down beating Cavan, Mayo pulling away from Roscommon as that game went on, well throughout the game, and Dublin beating Westmeath by double scores, 22 points to 11. You kind of noticed that there were an awful lot of different styles and systems, and you're going to probably talk through it and then go on to the tactics board and show us.
Yeah, I suppose, Shane, looking at the four games across four different provinces, I've probably seen sort of, distinct features in every game. If we start, for example, in Ulster, the Down Fermanagh game, like Down sort of played a very deep line defence in the first half, a very cautious, patient game with the idea behind it that in the second half they were going to open up a bit and obviously spring their substitutions and spring their runners. And in Leinster, I suppose Dublin set the tone early with that really, really incessant zonal press that they like to put on teams early. And the game was more or less over inside 10 minutes on the back of the press that they'd put on Westmeath's kick out. And then obviously you look at Connacht and you look at Roscommon and Mayo, and you look at Mayo, and Mayo have sort of gone with a real man-to-man type press all over the field, still very reliant on their six defenders at the back. And then in Munster, surprisingly in Munster, it was probably one of the most tactical affairs of the weekend in that Cork played Kerry, and Kerry decided to adopt like a middle third type press. But the problem that came with it, and I'll show it in a second on the tactics board, was that with Kerry's middle third press, what that allowed was that when they did turn Cork over at different occasions, they didn't have a target to kick. And their runners, the likes of White and the likes of Murphy, were probably, it may be extreme in saying it, but they were nearly cynically and systematically fouled in the middle third by Cork, by the likes of Dean and guys like that. And to be fair to Cork, they turned the game very attritional and made it a real war of attrition. But I suppose, Shane, if we start with Dublin, for example, and we start with the zonal press that Dublin would have put on against Westmeath on Saturday night, from the first kick out straight away, you would have a normal six forwards up front. But what Dublin do, Shane, is they like to push men on. So by pushing men on into this type of situation here, you're faced with a sea of blue, of complete blue. And, really and truly, it's a massive risk and reward that they're putting on. Now, the difference that Dublin have in comparison to other teams is they've got the physicality, they've got the strength, they've got the athleticism, so that if they do lose this kick out, they still have that athleticism and that ability to get back in. But they're so methodical, Shane, they're so organised, they're so systematic, and they put the Westmeath goalkeeper under fierce pressure early. Fierce pressure. And I go back to Niall Morgan talking about the All-Ireland final in 2018, where he talked about that first 10 minutes against Dublin, where he says that sea of blue, that press, that zonal press, he says it's hugely intimidating, Shane, for a goalkeeper. And it sets the game up. It just sets the tone straight away for Dublin to get a foothold in the game. But these lads, Shane, aren't just static. It's not like this. They're moving side to side. Their hands are up. They're shouting. They're roaring. And in fact, on Saturday night, it was that aggressive a press at different occasions that Martin McNally, the referee, actually cited one of the Dublin players for whatever it was. I don't know what it was, for screaming or shouting at the goalkeeper, because it had got that much, So if you're a goalkeeper and you're being put under that pressure, it's a serious thing to deal with, particularly early in a game when you're playing Dublin, But I suppose, Shane, if we look then at the different types of zonal organisation from teams. So, for example, if we take the Kerry game, for example, and we use this as the Kerry defence, what Kerry had themselves quite reasonably well set up in the middle third, but they brought out, for some strange reason, they brought their forward line out, and what we found the likes of Shawnee O'Shea, David Clifford, Brosnan. We found these guys operating in these areas here, and what it actually did, Shane, was when Cork did break lines, Cork got a lot of joy in little pockets of spacing around here. That's where Cork found joy. That's where Cork ultimately actually got their winning goal from. Cork six broke through the cordon at the very end, got himself into this area here, set up a scoring chance in here. It was popped back out to Connolly. He took the pot shot. Keane caught it and put it in the net. But it was this area here that was causing Kerry problems. And it was an interesting concept that Kerry tried to employ. And I'm thinking, Shane, were Kerry thinking further on down the line? Were they thinking that, to stop Dublin, to play against Dublin, they're going to have to flood the middle third. It's not going to work for them. But then, Shane, I suppose you take a different approach. You take Down's approach on Sunday, where Kevin McKiernan at 6 would have dropped off as a sweeper. So McKiernan was a sweeper. Then we had a lot of bodies back. So what we would have found was we would have found this situation here with Down on Sunday. We would have had a very, very deep line defensive unit with Down. And the problem that happened, the problem that happens there is that, well, one, it's a very tiring system. Two, if you do break forward, it's very difficult to press the opposition's kick out because you've got numbers back. You're having to get numbers up the field. So the likes of Fermanagh can get their kick outs away. And on Sunday, it might not be a bad thing for Down to actually concede the kick outs because they are playing Cavan, who have a distinct physical advantage over them, particularly the likes of Garoy, McKiernan and guys that got in around the middle. So it mightn't be a bad thing to concede the kick outs. But the issue that Down had in the first half, Shane, with this is that, yes, you can limit the opposition chances, but when you win the ball, it is very difficult if only 1 and 2 are going. When you win the ball, you need 4s and 5s going. You need options, but you also need an option up here inside. You also need a point man. And Down did leave Donald O'Hare there, Paul Devlin and Jerome Johnson at different occasions. So it has its merits. It has its pluses, particularly against teams. It depends, obviously, the opposition and who you're playing. But at the same time, it can become very, very difficult for teams to sustain that for 70 minutes. And then, obviously, we look at Mayo. We go back and look at Mayo against Roscommon at the weekend. You have the 6 Mayo forwards here. And what Mayo's forwards do very, very well, what they do very, very well is that they commit to a press. They commit to a press. And it is a man-to-man type system. They like to press forward. They like to push the opposition's kickouts. They like to squeeze that territory in here and put the opposition in the back foot. But what they're doing, Shane, by doing this is, when they do this and when they put that press on, they are leaving themselves quite vulnerable at the back here, in a 1v1, 2v2, 3v3 situation. And I just think that if this is going to work for Mayo moving forward, they will need to review this when they play the likes of Dublin, because if they set up like this against Dublin and they try and press high, Dublin have the athleticism and the runners to break those lines and cause them serious difficulties.
So I'm going to bring up an image on screen that you had on Twitter the other day, and it was about how Kerry didn't set up like this, but all too often they ended up with a cautious middle third press. So it's just up there on screen. And you talked about it, and just to read out the rest of your tweet, problems came when they turned Cork over, kick pass was redundant, and in a strategic foul-ridden performance, Cork matched up perfectly on Kerry's line breakers from deep, who were Tomás O'Sullivan, Paul Murphy and Gavin White. So I'm just going to leave that up there for a second. Can you expand on that point a little bit more?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, Shane, I'm just looking at here now, I've got my notes here. Dean went on to Murphy, okay? So Dean went on Murphy, O'Rourke went on White, and Collins went on Tom O'Sullivan. So Tom O'Sullivan, Gavin White and Paul Murphy in the last 2 National League games were causing serious problems on the front foot. So Kerry had set up in a similar fashion, Shane, against Monaghan. They'd set up in a very similar fashion against Donegal. But the difference was, Shane, that they were getting their runners through. They were getting their line breakers going. Murphy was coming from deep. White was coming from deep. O'Sullivan was coming from deep. But the difference was against Monaghan and against Donegal as well, Shane. They always had a threat inside. So they had that option of kicking the ball to Clifford or Brosnan. But on Sunday, what happened was that when they did turn the ball over on Cork, you had the likes of O'Rourke, you had the likes of Dean, who were systematically fouling Gavin White. I would love to see the statistics. And I think someone had a tweet up earlier about the statistics.
I have that actually, yeah. I'll bring that up on screen as well.
Bring that up out of interest.
Yeah, so this is Maurice Brosnan. He tweeted, Pop quiz, doing some work on the Cork v Kerry game. I reckon of the 71 fouls in the entire match, 37 were committed by starting defenders, midfielders. One defender went the whole game without committing a foul. Any guesses? And I actually read through that earlier. Can you guess who it is, Stephen?
The one defender who didn't commit a foul?
Yeah.
In the Cork team?
In the entire game.
Oh, in the entire game. Maybe I'll take a pot guess. Paul Murphy?
It was Tyke Morley, actually.
Okay.
33 of those fouls were Cork, which means that the rest of them were Kerry, which means they're obviously sinners as well with 38.
Yeah. No, there's no question about it. Listen, Kerry did commit some. Kerry's tackling at times. I actually felt, Shane, that in this middle third on Sunday past, Kerry didn't have the defensive intensity needed to turn Cork over. I thought Cork turned it into a real attritional affair, a real battle. And when Kerry did turn the ball over, at times they were held up, they were bear hugged at different occasions, really, really cynical fouls. And I thought the referee on the day from Tipperary was very lenient. He didn't produce any early cards, which would have put Cork under a little bit of pressure. Some of the black cards that he issued as well, I thought were a little bit dubious, particularly for Kerry. I thought some of them were quite harsh. But I just felt that on Sunday, we could talk about Kerry and what went wrong, but Cork did an awful lot right. And I had said on your show last week, Shane, that they had nothing to fear, and I wasn't being disrespectful, but they did not have nothing to fear. Cork are a massive county, 500,000 people, serious resources, massive population. There's no reason why counties like Cork shouldn't be dining at the top table. And if we go back to last year and the whirlwind start they got against Dublin in the Super 8s, and it was a great start, and I personally felt that if they'd have managed that game a little bit better, they could have actually beaten Dublin last year. There's no question about it. But they've sprinkled the team this year. They've introduced a lot of under-21s. They've introduced that team that won in All-Ireland, and that fills your team and your squad full of confidence. And what they have now going forward is fantastic confidence. Someone said to me there over the weekend, and they're completely right, or last couple of days, I think it was in school, like it wouldn't surprise you if Tip beat Cork. Well, I think yes, it wouldn't have surprised me 2 or 3 years ago, but it's not going to happen this year. They'll not be caught. After beating Kerry, their feet will be planted fairly back in the ground on Tuesday. They'll refocus and they'll say to themselves, we are 2 games away from an All-Ireland final. We're 1 game away from an All-Ireland semi-final. Let's get back to Croke Park and let's see what happens. And who knows? For me, they're on the lesser side of the draw. They've obviously got the winners of Connacht, so it's a huge opportunity. I wouldn't have fancied them against an Ulster team, and I certainly wouldn't have fancied them against Dublin in the semi-final. But against a Mayo or a Galway, Cork will go in there with serious confidence and serious belief.
You're cutting this tip man fairly deep. When we beat Mayo in an All-Ireland semi-final, I'll be coming back to you in a big way with this. I know it is unlikely, and Cork will be massive favourites. One question I want to ask you though, do you see that Kerry setup as being a setup that is not progressive, or do you feel that they did pick something that suits them, but they just weren't able to execute it for whatever reason on the day?
Yeah, I think there was a little bit of fear, Shane. I think there was a little bit of fear about Cork's athleticism, about Cork's running power. People were very dismissive of Cork. Oh, they were Division 3. But if you actually look at the statistics, Shane, of Cork's Division 3 record, they were averaging over 20 points a game. They were averaging over 20 points a game in Division 3. They had a score difference of like plus 46, plus 47. I said last week that breeds confidence. It really breeds confidence. They are one team who, for me, looking across the board at what's left in the country, they're the one team that physically, can dine at the top table, and I had this discussion today with a guy actually in school, strength conditioning coach, John McMahon. He's in doing a bit of work with our like an outreach program with our young lads, and John would have been doing the strength conditioning for Derry a number of years ago, and he would have shadowed the likes of Michael Kennedy, the Dublin player development coach and stuff in the past, and would have spent a bit of time at Leinster Rugby. And he said to me, he says, like, strength conditioning wise, like Dublin are so far ahead of the pack, everything's in place, and Brian Cullen's obviously in charge of their S&C, and you look at the condition that they're in, Shane, the strength of Kieran Kilkenny, to be able to take hits and ride tackles and things. But Cork are up there as well for physicality and strength. They are just as equally as strong and equally as physical. And I thought on Sunday, I just felt Kerry went in, and what they do is, put it like this, Shane, I think the best way of describing it, if Kerry had went in and made it a shootout, they would have won the shootout. But they went in and made it a battle, and they lost the battle.
Okay.